I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. On today's show, we're going to break down the USMNT's win against Jamaica in the quarterfinals of the Nations League. The U.S. went down to Jamaica in the first leg and won 1-0, and then played the second leg in St. Louis on Monday night, winning 4-2. The 5-2 aggregate score moves them into the Nations League semifinals in March against an opponent yet to be determined. To help me today, I've invited Charles Boehm to join the show. Charles is a Washington, D.C.-based writer and editor who has covered all levels of the American soccer scene since 2004. His work has appeared in a range of outlets, including ESPN.com, MLSsoccer.com, Overlap Digital Magazine, SoccerWire.com, and Gothamist.com. Charles, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to start big picture. What was your biggest takeaway from this two-match window against Jamaica?
Well, it's more of a collection of kind of smaller, interesting things. I think in the big picture, you have to say a lot of the right boxes, necessary and desired, from a U.S. standpoint, got checked because two victories, two different kinds of victories, very little drama or stress in terms of dealing with an underdog opponent, giving players a couple different kinds of experiences, and then layering on some little wrinkles to the game model that I think we're starting to see emerge from Pochettino, and unfussy advancement to yet another CNL finals weekend. And I imagine, I don't know if they'll be outright favored to win the whole thing, but probably yes, because they're the only ones that have ever won this thing, and they haven't shown any weakness to speak of, other than maybe a few minor flags in the second half last night.
That first half last night to me was the most exciting I think I've seen him play. The best I've seen him play in quite some time to me. I mean, I was on my feet like cheering at home and was just thoroughly entertained by that. I mean, it was just super exciting football to watch. Am I right there? Do you think that's the best they played in a while, or am I overexcited about that?
Yeah, and of course we always have the usual caveats, right? This was a team that they were favored to win, and even by Jamaica standards, the Reggae Boys didn't really show up until it was too late last night. Maybe the spirit got broken a little bit, just losing at home in the first leg on Thursday. Maybe the wind out of their sails from. It seems clear to me that we don't know everything about what's going on behind the scenes, but there's always quirks and drama around the Reggae Boys, and huge blow for Michail Antonio to not even make the trip. We're told that he lost his passport. Who knows if there's more to the story, but certainly they didn't give a great account of themselves, and so you factor that in. But when you look at the number of new ideas that Pochettino kind of trotted out, some different changes to the lineup and responsibilities and relationships, and it's so easy for stuff like that to fall flat, right, or to backfire. And nothing really did. There was a little bit of, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more shortly, but there was a little bit of a dip in concentration that allowed Demario Aggregate to snatch a couple of goals in the second half, after I think the tie was done and dusted by and large in realistic terms. But there was quality, there were positive relationships and evolution of existing relationships, which I think is a really good sign. And the right mentality, I think, for the majority of the two matches.
Yeah, that's maybe the only the negative you could say about last night was conceding those two goals in the second half. If they had been able to keep a clean sheet, it would have been, I would say, almost a perfect performance for that match. I mean, what do you attribute that to? Is that just they got a little comfortable with the scoreline? Is that just this team not quite able to go the full 90 minutes yet? I mean, what do you think happened there?
Well, yeah, I think there's probably a confluence of factors. For sure, the rain had set in. I guess it started raining late first half. So everything got slicker. Legs get tired. Inevitably, I think, maybe not inevitably, but in many cases like this, you do see just a little bit of the you're not quite at the peak levels of being dialed in, because on some level the players know that they're almost home and dry. And there was a little bit of quirkiness. There was a deflection. I think it was on the second one, and so things can and will go wrong. But Pochettino, I was going to try and pull up a quote he said. He said, "It's true that the second half that we didn't approach the game in the way we wanted. We were talking about the challenges was to win the second half, and that was the only thing that I was a little bit worried." Not to go into the second half with the same mentality and same aggressivity in the approach that we started the first half, and that happened. I think we can call that mentality, or we can call or use different word. But the thing is, things that we still need to improve. So he made, and I'm sure that was conscious and orchestrated on his part to make it clear publicly that this wasn't an A+, but I think you can say in a lot of context, you want to dig into things. It's always good to give a fuller grade, but on some level, this game, there's a pass-fail element to this tie, because you've got to get through this one to get more games, right? And at this point, with no qualification matches, every single competitive match with anything on the line is so vital for this team. I mean, the friendlies can bring value, but you've got to have that as much of a competitive atmosphere and as much of a sense of stakes and pressure as you can. And that's something, I think the mental side of the game is something he spends a lot of time on, and he and his staff really immerse themselves in. And I think that's been an early area of focus for Poch.
Yeah.
But you get through this to give yourself 2 more in March. And so that part of it is, I think, vital.
Yeah. Yeah, they got the job done. That's the most important thing. Let's talk about some of the individual performances. Who's a player that stood out to you over these 2 matches from a positive point of view?
I think this was a great window for Tanner Tessman, and I've been hoping that we can at some point move on from at least the kind of repetitive aspects of the Tyler Adams discourse, and this is not a reflection on him as a player. It's not his fault. He's had one vexing injury issue after another, and the frustrations, right? But there was so often, we saw early on in the 2022 cycle, really even before, right? Even going all the way back to the kind of the final days of 2017 and the early days of the Berhalter tenure and the transition there, what a special player Tyler Adams was and is, and how vital he can be in terms of the leadership, the engine on and off the field, everything he brings. But this player pool should be big enough and deep enough that you don't have to make fundamental adjustments for every member of your 11 not being available. And so I thought, and I think we're still learning about kind of like how Poch is approaching the pragmatic aspects of being an international manager, when you have your ideas and your game model, but you also have the time and depth limitations, of how much you can really get into the nuts and bolts of things in these short camps. So, I think so far we have to call it a 4-2-3-1 more often than not, right? And I think if you have whoever it is now, I think you've got more options and you've got more interesting combinations and more ways to play and more ways to keep the floor of the performance high if Adams is not available. And so I really like what Tessman brings to the table. I've rated him ever since he signed his homegrown deal with FC Dallas. He's had some fits and starts at international level. He hasn't always been showing his best with the national team, but he's still early in the senior career, right? I think the Olympics this summer, where he was the unquestioned leader and midfield general of that Olympic team, was a valuable experience for him. He spoke to TNT in the postgame show last night about this window was big in my career. And I think you see there's a lot of interesting tools that he brings to the table. And Pochettino said, he was effusive. He said, if you asked me or forced me to give a note, meaning grade, he said out of a 10, I'd give him 8, 9, somewhere in there, which you don't hear a coach, even after a big dub, you don't hear a coach say that.
I was surprised. I don't think I've ever heard a coach give a rating before.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good example of Poch being, so far, really refreshingly kind of open, communicative, ready to go into detail in front of the media, which is super cool, especially from my perspective. But I think this was a good week for him. for Tessman. And it wasn't just, I mean, he completed, I think, 73 to 74 passes. He was kind of not strikingly dominant, but just sort of was cleaning things up and holding things down in central midfield. And then on the second goal, he ranges forward and shows a little bit of a different flair to his game. At least he's got a little bit more sauce, I think, than you might see on first glance, where he dummies the cutback to open up time and space for Pulisic to hit what turns out to be a deflected finish. But it was a really nice display of soccer IQ from Tessman.
Yeah, some of these, you mentioned this Tyler Adams, discourse, and that is a topic that's talked about a lot is, who can fill in for him when he's gone. It seems like, Tessman, maybe Aiden Morris, Johnny Cardoso are the leading candidates right there. Of course, Cardoso, got injured. We didn't see much of him, this camp. Morris, we didn't get to see any of him because of an injury this camp. But where do you think Tessman stands relative to those two guys? I mean, how would you rate those three guys against each other right now?
Yeah, and I think reading tea leaves a bit, I think it's pretty open at the moment, and I think you could understand if Pochettino feels like he can't, and he wouldn't say this, but he can't really. You can't say it's Adams' job, right? Or you're competing for Adams' backup because Adams just hasn't been available enough. You have to move forward with what's available to you, and he just hasn't been available very often. So I think while he would certainly fit into your ideal 11, at this point it's an open competition. I think Cardoso has some really sort of the attacking or build up and on ball nuances that are really interesting. He's playing at a very high level in Spain, but he hasn't quite shown, I think, his best with the national team, and it's the nature of the position, but he's also had some pretty prominent errors, right? Some costly errors with national team matches. So I think that's a Poch type of player, but in the meantime, Morris and Tessman bring a physical aspect, a little bit of muscle, all the range that you need, with a little bit with more flair and an on ball ability than they get credit for. So I think that trio it offers some interesting ideas, and we're talking about that as a trio in the first place because Poch has found these kind of hybridized roles for guys that we were used to talking about, right? So MMA is now kind of all over, right? So McKennie and Musa were in kind of advanced roles. Musa seems to be this, I don't know if it's a deputized or if it's just him going back to his Valencia roots, but he's been pretty good as a wide, albeit not touchline hugging, but a wide midfielder on the right flank. And then it just feels like at this point, like Wes McKennie, especially when it's his day and he's up for it, you can plug him in anywhere in, I don't know, 5-6 roles, and he's going to give you a good performance and do fun stuff.
I enjoyed watching Weston last night. I mean, I thought he was back to his kind of just energetic, impactful self, and I thought that was good to see. Mm-hmm. So what about the opposite end of the spectrum? A player that maybe stood out in a more negative way, or maybe just a player who just didn't help their case that much in this window.
Well, I don't know if he would be the top of my list, but I think the top of many observers' list is Tim Ream. And again, some of this is the nature of the position, right? So I think we're coming away overall with good vibes about the center back performances, but you still have these glaring sort of gaffes within that. So, the other night in leg one, both Ream and Mark McKenzie, which is an interesting partnership, I think, and bears watching in the longer run. But they both were at fault on the play that led to the penalty kick. Matt Turner was nominally was at fault for having gotten the whistle blown, but was exposed on the play, bailed him and his center backs out with a PK save. But Ream had trouble. He's getting mixed up in the open field by Shamar Nicholson, and then McKenzie just arrives in the right place and time to bail him out, but just doesn't handle that individual battle in the right way to get it done. And you saw a few examples of that type of play where in a flash, your center backs are exposed and having to fend for themselves, and that's there's systemic breakdowns. There's multiple people involved in it getting to that point, but then you still hope that the individuals have the quality to handle that situation out there on an island. And they didn't always. I think maybe you have to say based on results that they would get a passing grade just because the bulk of what they did was good. But when you look at expected goals last night, surprisingly perhaps, the numbers are not that far apart for the two teams. So I think that tells you there was a little bit of a problem there. I think you have to include Joe Scally in that as well. He did not cover himself in glory on the second goal, gave up too much space in the first place, and then still gets beat on the dribble out there on the right flank. And and I think I put Scally in a little bit of the category of Cardoso, where you see what they're doing, and they're holding their own at a really high level at a club of note in a top league. So there's a certain amount of equity there, but it just hasn't translated consistently enough, I think, to the performances that you would resultingly expect from them at the international level, particularly with Scally being rightly or wrongly, perceived as a defense first option. Like, this is supposed to be a no fuss specialist right back. He can get forward. He's not missing that aspect of the toolkit, but you're supposed to be able to trust him first and foremost defensively. And so for him to get exposed that way on that second goal, I'm sure he's getting points docked there, right? And this is supposed to be the defensive alternative to Serginho Dest, and I'm still waiting to see his best, I think, with the senior level.
Let me ask you about a few other guys we haven't talked about yet. Ricardo Pepi is a guy I want to get your thoughts on. I mean, 2 goals this window. How do you see this number 9 position for the U.S. right now, and where do you put Ricardo amongst that group?
Listen, I mean, I think you could still mount some little quibbles about the overarching holistic nature of his number 9 performances, but I think you're already getting too deep into the weeds with that. He's been asking for an opportunity. He's been stating his case. He's been scoring goals off the bench, and this applies to both club and country. And he said it coming into this window. At the start of this window, he said, "I'm ready to be the guy," and he scored goals. I mean, he scored key goals in both matches. He was a little more involved. I think he was a little starved for touches and didn't do a lot with the touches that he had in terms of build up in Kingston on Thursday. Last night, he played 2 key passes. You can see the relationships. You can see the understanding that they have. Called his own number on a play where I thought maybe he had options to slip people in, and then turns in and hits a really lovely finish. His first goal from outside of the box for the USMNT, which surprised me a little bit, but I thought that was noteworthy. And so what else do you want, right? The guy, I go back over and over again to a conversation I had with his dad. I wrote a feature piece about Ricardo when he won finished first in the 22 under 22 rankings that MLSsoccer.com does every year. And I got to talk to his dad, who pulled his truck over between construction jobs and talked to me about his kid, which was pretty awesome. And he's like, olfato del gol, which is a Spanish term for a nose for goal, right? His kid has always had that, and he's just one of those ball is life kids. He's grown up in El Paso, and you still see that now. Of course, he's adding facets to his game, but the kid just always seems to find a way to get a goal or a really good opportunity on frame every game. And so I think you have to rate that. You could say on paper that Flo Balogun is a more complete striker, but I don't think this job. And I think I want to get past the whole framing of who's the starting number 9. Like, there doesn't have to be anyone in pen. Like, it's one spot. It's the most important spot on the field, arguably. At least for the juncture that this team is at. Let's see who's in form every window as it arrives, and then get him on the training ground and see who's doing the business. And like right now, it's Ricardo Pepi. So, and I think if he continues this momentum, and confidence and momentum are so enormously influential in that position, if he takes this into the club level and keeps clawing out more minutes and keeps producing for PSV, I see no reason why he's not going to continue developing and evolving his game.
Yeah, I've been enjoying watching his, I don't know if you've noticed this, his kind of body language on the field. He wants the ball so bad. I mean, you see him gesturing for it like constantly, and it's the same at PSV. He'll come on in like the 75th minute, and he's so hungry to get the ball. He's just there's almost like a frustration. It's almost like a frustration sometimes. He wants the ball so bad because he wants to score goals because he's gotten these, I think, limited opportunities, and I think that's overall a good thing.
And I would also add to that he's seeing the game. He's always been an instinctive player with a high IQ, especially in the box. You see him just come alive when the buildup gets into the final third, or there's space start to open up and US are getting in and around the box. That's when you see, I think, his top level, because his understanding of space and his ability to get a shot off and test the keeper is really, I would say, elite, especially considering we're talking about a 21-year-old here still.
Right. Well, let me ask you about Pochettino now, because we've had 4 games now to see how Pochettino manages the team. What are some of the things you've picked up from him on how maybe he's doing things differently with this U.S. men's national team than what they were doing before?
I definitely think part of the cleverness of Pochettino is he's not the things he's talking the most about in his media availabilities are not necessarily this area and the things that that another coach in his position might. So, someone like Jurgen Klinsmann often seemed to be just as focused on talking about what he's doing, talking about the changes and how we're what we're doing, as opposed to actually showing the products. And I think Poch is very much like, he's got some little wrinkles and growing bigger with each game, it seems. He's been working on concepts that he's not necessarily advertising publicly, but you're starting to see it. This game especially, I thought, my colleagues and friends Ben Wright and Joseph Lowry, who do great work for MLS Soccer as well as for the Backheel.com site, they did some video and some breakdowns on social about the third man run concept, which is, you could say it's a basic concept in modern soccer, but there are repetitions you need to get, and there needs to be a coherent strategy to cultivate it. And I think you're seeing that right now. You have some players that know each other well, that are familiar now, but he's adding different levels and layers of complexity to what they're doing, and I think that speaks well of him, to see the way that the players are understanding how the pattern needs to look. And then as there's more reps, then it starts to look smoother and slicker. And even on a bad pitch in Jamaica, you were starting to see those signs of almost like a sort of a modified, semi-improvised, as much as you can play juego de posición at international level, and if you're not Spain, right, you're seeing those relationships and patterns start to become clear. And then the whole concept of what I wrote last night about how the left flank has been like one of the most dependable, established areas of this team for going on 5 years now. You have a leather-lunged left back in Jedi Robinson who can go end to end, who can contribute at both ends of the pitch, and that has allowed Christian Pulisic to kind of invert and kind of wander and go find the game up on the left flank. So you would think that a lot of national team coaches want to limit the variables that they're tweaking with at any given point. Poch says no, like I'm gonna pinch Jedi in, I'm gonna switch Pulisic central, and now Tim Weah, who is, because his ocular dominance, he's left eye dominant according to Pochettino, and it's funny the way this all filtered out with the TNT broadcast crew explaining what they had gotten from these conversations in the build up to the game, and then hearing Poch kind of react to that and then give his side of it in the press conference. Basically, they test the eye dominance of all the players, and they thought that Weah's left eye dominance would enable him to flourish on the left, even though we haven't seen him there much for club or country, as far as I remember. Sure enough, he looked pretty comfortable there. Hits a banger of a goal, pings one off the post in the opening minutes. And it's a totally different look for the left flank, and it works.
Yeah, I have to say, I certainly didn't expect when I saw the lineup card come out last night to see Tim Weah on the left. But like you said, it worked and it looked good. Well, Charles, I know we only have a few minutes here, but one last thing I want to ask you about is it's going to be 4 months until we see most of these players again in the Nations League semifinals in March. What are some things you're going to be keeping your eye on over these next 4 months regarding this U.S. player pool?
Yeah, well, so we talked about Testament a little earlier, and Poch kind of capped a glowing paragraph or so of praise for Testament with the sort of encouragement that he hopes that he goes and gets more minutes at Lyon, that he can continue to contribute more, and that really sums it up for a lot of these guys. They're still in a daily dogfight at club level, right? To be a trusted regular, so. That inevitably what's happening at club level always has a knock-on effect. So you want to see that these guys that showed well this window kick on and consolidate the progress that they're making. And there's so many factors that are outside of their control, much less outside of Pochettino's control. But I think that's going to be the key, is seeing how they sustain this. Musa, for example, is really interesting to see different facets of his game that are kind of emerging now. Can he make the same kind of progress with Milan? So, and then I think actually this is going to be a more interesting January camp than most, just because Poch has been, I think, remarkably. I'll say it like this. I think he's doing his best to steer clear of any of the sort of polemic aspects of the whole MLS versus Europe versus home versus abroad kind of discourse, and just says if you're performing, you'll get a chance, and he's not ruling anything out. He's willing to work with MLS players. He'll have a whole camp full of them down in Fort Lauderdale in January, and then at least I think they're going to play Venezuela, and it sounds like we'll have one more opponent, TBA. That's interesting to me. Like I'd love to see more of what this guy does, not just with the top of the pool, but those further down, because that's crucial in this process too. So I'm intrigued to see what comes out of Jan camp.
Yeah, there'll be lots to watch for all these players over the next 4 months, even though they won't be together as a team. And looking forward to seeing it all. Thank you so much for being on the show, Charles. I'll make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is @cbohm, and also to your work at MLSsoccer.com. Thanks again for joining the show today.
Love chopping it up with you, Frank, and thanks to everybody for listening and reading.
Thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X @FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.